Good evening, ghoulies. Good evening, ghosts and goblins. The candelabra is aflame. Good evening, ghoulies, ghosts and goblins. Are you ready? Okay, all right, enough of that. So tonight, we're doing a pure movie stream. This is Dark Fall, Spooktober, Mirror Moon, Dark Autumn, Spooky Season, Episode 2. Last time we did Final Girl. We talked about Friday the 13th, American Horror Story, Camp Redwood, 84, and Barbarian. This time, I've got a mega treat for anyone interested because we're doing Candyman 2021. We're going to talk about the old one while we go through it, but Candyman 2021. We're also doing Wolfman. So we're doing the Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in relation to the Wolfman reboot with Benicio. If you cross this line, right? We're also going to talk about Let the Right One In and Byzantium. So we got a lot tonight. Okay, so we're covering Creatures of the Night, Night Creatures. This is Night Creatures. Creatures, do you hear them? The children of the night. What music they make? Music. Remember from Bram Stoker's Dracula? So we did Dracula last year. We covered we did a deep dive into the book, into the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker, and we also talked about Bram Stoker's we talked about Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is a great film. And so this time we're going to talk a little bit about vampires. I wasn't even going to do vampires this time, but then I decided to take the audience suggestion. Somebody said somewhere that I should watch Let the Right One In, and I did. So we're going to watch that. It's a Swedish vampire. And we're also going to do Byzantium is one of my favorites. It's not well known, and it's a very good film by Neil Jordan, about 2012. So we're going to start off, though, by talking about Candyman. This is a Jordan Peele produced film. And have you guys seen this? I know probably everybody's seen Candyman, the first movie, right, from the 90s. It's like 1992, I think 1992. And this one is a bit didactic in terms of its sort of politico messaging. But overall, I think it's a good film. because it's fairly unique and it's a good mixture of the art world, the urban scape, the art world, a take on the art world. Oftentimes, what we're going to find with these with horror movies is that there's some sort of mixture or some sort of even a parody almost of the contemporary culture, especially especially capitalist culture. You know, The Shining has that in ways, and depending on your interpretation. But you know, there's all this stuff about the gold standard and all that. You know, in The Shining. But mainly, what I'm talking about is Jack Torrance's character and how he is a writer, and that is going to play into. It's almost like the movie Wolf, directed by Mike Nichols, is a sequel to The Shining in terms of Jack's character. Yes, Jason says The Shining has everything. Everything. It does. The Shining is great. And again, I'll point out that The Shining is another example of a Stefan Kang book that he sold the rights to Stanley Kubrick and then complained later about the changing of it, right, when he sold the rights. So therefore, you give over the artistic process to Stanley Kubrick, and he's going to change it. And he made it a completely different work. And coming up tomorrow night, short shameless plug. Coming up tomorrow night, I'm going to be doing an analysis of the dark half. I don't want to move my books because my candelabra is right next to the bookcase. So I'm just going to leave it where it is. But tomorrow night we'll be doing the dark half, which is we'll be doing a full. Dang, phone be blowing up. Apologies. Tomorrow night we'll be doing a full explication of The Dark Half, the book by Stefan Kang. But tonight, we're going to focus on these. Okay, so let me make sure that's off. All right, so tonight let's start off with Candyman. Okay, so Candyman 2021. So the movie really doesn't get going. It has like a series of prologues, but the prologues are interesting. So what happens is essentially sometime in it looks like the 70s, you know, it's kind of, this is a reboot, but it's like the 70s. And we find out that we see that there's a boy and he's walking through his neighborhood of Cabrini Green, which is inside of Chicago. I suppose it's Chicago South. It's not really South Side. I don't know Chicago at all. Somebody can correct me on that. But yeah, sorry, Kara. But he is walking through, and there is the police are looking for this guy who apparently is a bad guy and has a hook for a hand. So in a way, what we get here is there are creepers. It's weird how this movie can't really decide what it wants to do with the bad guy in terms of, is he a creeper, is he not? I mean, you would see this and he's a creeper. He lives in the walls. So he goes down into the basement where the laundry is, and there's a hole in the wall. And of course, he hears this, you know, or whatever, and like Candyman steps out of the wall and offers him some candy. But then the police come, and of course, they're the bad guy. And he walks upstairs, drops some candy, and the noise it makes causes the cops to come down, and they kill this guy on the spot. And so the legend that we're going to learn here is basically, let me take this out, is basically that Candyman is this guy who, okay, so let me back it up a little. There was someone had stolen a child, okay, in the neighborhood, right? And this is through the artistic impression of these artists. And she basically, like, there's the annual bonfire night. It's kind of like it's the 12th of July in Belfast, but it's not. It's bonfire night in Chicago. And she runs out and she's got the child and she's going to offer it up to the flames as a sacrifice, like to Baal or whatever. Right. And then she like, someone takes the child and then she runs and she immolates herself. Okay. So that's what we think at the beginning of the film. That there's this crazy Bloody Mary running around. Okay. And then what we see is we see a kind of a shadow show of this happening on the walls. It's really clever how it's done. And one thing that's interesting about this movie that kind of drew me in right away is that the original movie begins the way that The Shining does, which is that we have an overhead shot of the tops of the buildings in the skyline of Chicago looking down. And the reason that they do that is that you remember that the Wendy Carlos synth, dark synth score, the amazing score for The Shining, is playing while we're tracking the yellow Volkswagen through the hills in The Shining, and it's going, through the mountains, and it's going up to the Overlook Hotel. It's interesting that they're in a yellow bug, right? And that's going to appear, by the way, again in The Dark Half by Stephen King. And of course, I don't often make much of the symbolism of cars in movies unless it's to a point. Like we talked about it a little bit in Donnie Darko, but cars have horse names, horsepower, but the car in The Shining and the car, specific cars have a notable reference point for us because the yellow Volkswagen obviously is the Ted Bundy vehicle, right? We can't help but when we think of kind of like when you get the dark van, the creeper van, right? It has a potency to it. It's a potent symbol, just like the yellow Volkswagen Bug. And so it's interesting that this is a kind of a potent symbol. But what happens is in the new Candyman, instead of getting a God's eye view, which is in The Shining, remember, you kind of feel that there's a demon who is following the Torrance family through the mountains up to the Overlook Hotel. You hear in the sound editing, you hear sounds of screams. You hear kind of demonic wailing, and it's almost like we're flying over and that this is going to join into the family, right? Well, we also get that in Candyman, in the first Candyman, but in this one, it's interesting that he flips it. It's mirrored. So we actually get a bottom-up view, almost like a hellish view up into the world because the buildings, the skyline, we see them from the ground up, but they are floating in clouds, almost like we're seeing them in a mirror image, in a mirror view. That's why it's the full moon mirror, right? The moon plays such again, a potent role in a lot of these horror films, especially obviously in the wolf films. And another interesting thing is that I'm not saying Candyman is derivative of The Shining. I'm just saying that there are obviously common things here and that play into the kind of into the cultural literacy of horror filmmaking that you can't really escape. And one of those is that you notice that in The Shining, as with Kubrick movies, all the angles are right angles. We see straight on, kind of like you're looking at this bookcase right now. It's straight on. But the moment when Wendy, interesting that it's Wendy, right? Because we just did the Peter Pan streams and the significance of the name Wendy from J.M. Barrie coining that name. We did that with Jamie. And when her mind fractures, when she sees Jack's all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and then she sees the awful scene with Danny, right? Which is it's hard to say what it is on here, but she walks into the room and she sees the guy in black tie, and then she sees the guy as the bear, right, in the costume, and this is supposed to be Danny and Jack, right? Her mind is splitting. Well, when you see that, the angle all of a sudden goes askew. It's like a 45-degree angle, as if all the angles that we're seeing are marked, and our frame of reference is completely different. We don't know where to find ourselves. Well, we see that from the beginning of Candyman because all the buildings are kind of at this weird angle, like they're not completely in frame. It's very well done, and it's almost like the clouds are at the top, but like we're looking into the bottom of a lake, like they're at the bottom. So we don't know up from down. In other words, we're in a mirror world, and that's important because Candyman is all about people who stare into the mirror and say his name 5 times. Now, that part is going to become kind of overly didactic as far as the political potency of it in the film, and it doesn't really make sense of like how it works in the film, because it's like who's the actual bad guy and who are the good guys in this? Maybe they're in a world where there are no real good and bad guys. And so then anyway, we cut to present day and we see a couple of guys or whatever go into this apartment, and they're going to see their sister who's like big in the art world, and she owns a very, very expensive high-rise condo or apartment in one of these buildings that we've obviously just been looking at. And the theme of gentrification is going to play into this, and in terms of like what's on the inside, what's on the outside, who belongs where. And then we see that her boyfriend is this artist, and he is obviously a successful artist, and he's got paintings all over the wall. They're looking at his paintings, and he's got a show coming up, but he doesn't know what to do for it, so he's trying to get some inspiration. So the brother of the artist's sister says, "Okay, do you want to hear a ghost story?" And he tells a ghost story that we see this sort of shadow play for this ghost story that occurs, and it's interesting because it's a ghost story in the life of the movie that is local. It's completely local. And I like how they do that. It's not a lot of times when people tell a ghost story, they're going to tell a ghost story about like a hook hand. And that's interesting because that is part of the film, but it gives a different basis for that. So basically we learned that, if you look in the mirror and you say his name 5 times, he will appear. Okay. So they leave, and they're all kind of freaked out, and they leave. And then what happens is the artist decides to go down to Cabrini Green. Shouts out to Block Party out there. And before I forget, shouts out to Sammy for dropping a big time fat chat. Drop $50. Really appreciate that for all the work here. And also shouts out to Jason. Shouts out to Jason for his big time support. Really appreciate that. If you want to support, you can like and share the stream. You can hit the links that the wonderful, beautiful mods are dropping, or in the channel or video description. So he decides to go down and seek some inspiration at Cabrini Green. Well, he goes and he kind of hops the fence into this fenced off neighborhood, which is in the middle of a neighborhood in the middle of Chicago. And he's taking pictures, and he goes into these, it's obviously, it's in the projects. He goes into the projects houses there, and it's fenced off and then double fenced off. So something did actually happen here, and he kind of has no memory of it. He goes into one of the houses. There's graffiti everywhere, and there's holes in the wall. And this is again, one of the things, horror tropes that scares me, like that gets to me in real life, is I have this thing about people in the walls. I don't know why. But I think it's, have you ever seen that movie Hotter in the House with Gary Busey? It's not a scary movie, but it's like, you hear these horror stories of like people living in your walls, or like in the attic or in the basement. Especially it happens at like college towns, and it's like, yeah, this guy was living in the house for 3 years. We didn't even know. It's like, what? But this plays more of an occult theme, because not only is he literally hidden, but it's like he's on the other side of reality. So anyway, he goes outside and he's continuing to take pictures. He's an artist, but he's taking photographs, And he comes across this guy. The guy says, "Oh man, everybody pieced out of this neighborhood until the gentrification happened or whatever, And then they sort of make friends, and he follows the guy to the laundromat. The guy tells him further stories, right, about what happened. And throughout the movie, this guy is going to be kind of a chorus figure, kind of a Greek chorus figure, because he gives he is a signpost for where we find ourselves in the reality of the movie. But eventually, he is going to cross that barrier, and he will actually be a major role in the story, right? Well, what he says basically is that, like, one of the versions he tells is that, like, there was an artist in the 1800s in the neighborhood who painted the family of a rich family and their daughter, and that they then fell in love, and that the guy's family hired some people, and they hunted him down, and they did terrible things to him, and that so the kind of psychic ghost of that character lives on, And the reason that the Candyman exists is because one of the things they did to him was they kind of pasted like bee honey all over him, and so that the bees like attacked him to death before they like whipped him. They did all these terrible things. But the Candyman we learn, spoilers, the Candyman we learn is the Candyman because number one, he was painted with bee honey, and also because they cut off his arm and they put a hook into his arm, kind of like Captain Hook, so that he exists in this other world, in this never land, right? Where he's trying to grab the KIDS. Also, there's a hive of them. So he's always surrounded by bees, and that sort of is a psychopomp, which we're going to get into in depth tomorrow night, the idea of psychopomps, because that plays a major role in the narrative of the dark half. And there are many Candymen. It's not just that one guy, and it's not just what happened at the beginning of this movie. But while the guy is taking pictures of Cabrini Green, that's the name of the place, he gets stung by a bee, and then he's going to keep... It's interesting because I watched so many movies over the past week where somebody has a wound right here on their hand. And it happened with Reptile. It happened with the dark half. It happened here. It happened in the vampire films that I watched, but it's always right here. And it's always because it's, people are often bitten or stung on the hand reaching out. But he gets stung here and he keeps picking at it until it becomes this infected, gross glob. And then what's clever about the movie is that as time goes on, this artist, because he gains inspiration from this place, and then he does a gallery show, and his skin starts to look like a wasp nest. It's like got all these holes in it and stuff, so that he's like the home for the hive, if that makes sense. So when he goes and he has this show, his art is completely different than it was before, but he gets kind of railroaded by his manager and by this other guy who comes in, and then by the art critic. The art critic comes in and says, how derivative, the modern exposition of, right? And she's like, this is bullshit. But his art is striking, and it's very Francis Bacon. We did a stream on Velvet Goldmine, what's it called? What's the film we did? The Jake Gyllenhaal film on the movies, Velvet Buzzsaw. So we did it because it's interesting because Velvet Goldmine is a Neil Jordan film, and that's he did the Byzantium film we're going to cover in a little bit. But so Velvet Buzzsaw deals with this art come alive through the agency of the artist, right, or through the person who's selling it in that movie. And it's very horrific. It's like screaming faces, and I'm talking about Francis Bacon, the modern artist, the modern Irish artist, not the 16th century writer, and Elizabethan and Jacobean figure. So he puts on this show, and then eventually he becomes obsessed with his art, and so the movie, it also functions as a kind of metaphor for the artist, right? And how far the artist is willing to go to produce his art. He lives his art, and it's like he is breaking on through to the other side in order to find inspiration for his art, but the other side is where hell is in this movie. And so he eventually, what happens is that people start calling Candyman in the art gallery. The jerk manager and his assistant are left over, and she says, well, it was a stupid art show, but what if we say his name, right? And she says his name in the mirror, and of course in the mirror we see the shadow play of Candyman appear, and he slashes her throat, and then he kills the guy, and then so what we have is the art world mixed up with death. And of course, this is going to sell the artist's paintings, but they wonder who did this? And of course, the suspicion falls on the artist himself because he was getting bad reviews. But he's like, no, I was at home. So just like in the dark half, we have a kind of split between the artist and the apotheosis of will that is created. So it goes beyond DID. It's like there are actually two people, and one of them lives in the mirror world. And we see there's one scene where there's like, it's like at a school, and it's these girls in the mirror, and they see something about it, and they do it, and then they're all killed. And that was kind of an extraneous scene. They didn't need that. I didn't see what the point of that. How would they relate to the art world, or to the main narrative in the film? They could have cut that. But what happens is basically that he becomes this guy, the artist. He becomes the Candyman, and part of it is that people are unwilling to face his art. He's unwilling to face himself. And then he becomes the only one that's truly facing himself. And then he learns that through his mother that actually was he adopted? Something happens. And basically we learned that the thing that we saw at the beginning with the child that was stolen, that was going to be thrown onto the flames, was actually him. And so he was going to be sacrificed, and that the woman who was killed at the time of the bonfire was not trying to throw him in the flames. She was trying to save him from the flames, and that Candyman was there to commit his body to the flames. But then we learned that because of that, he can't escape his fate within the movie because he has asked for it, because he plays an agency in accessing this demon beyond the mirror, in welcoming him into himself and becoming Candyman. So fast forward through the movie, and what happens is we learn that the guy who was kind of the Greek chorus figure who told him all about the story, who was living in Cabrini Green, well, he's living there because he's actually the kind of guide, not a psychopomp, but he's a guide to bringing forth new Candyman. And now the artist is becoming Candyman to a point where his body is almost completely like shredded over and stung over, and he has no more feeling anymore. His eyes are kind of glazed over. It's the same thing that happens in the dark half. And the guy saws his arm off and then replaces the stump with a hook. So now he's Captain Hook, and he's got this serial killer's aesthetic uniform for being the new Candyman, but in real life. So Candyman now has totally crossed over from being in the mirror world to representing the deepest fears of the people who live in the neighborhood in real life. And eventually, the artist's girlfriend goes and she actually kills the Greek chorus figure. And when the police arrive, they tell her to put her hands up. You know the whole thing. Well, I'm not going to say it here, but they tell her to put her hands up, and they arrest her. And then they try and tell her, "Hey, look, maybe if the story is that we shot the other guy because he was coming at the other officers," and she's like, "What?" So now she's on the other side. And it's interesting that we see her inside the back of the cop car, like with a mirror of the window. The window functions as a mirror, and it's like she's gone inside the mirror, and now what she does is she welcomes this demon creature to follow her and to rescue her. And the demon is her artist, who's formerly the artist known as the artist, but now he's Candyman. So he saves her. So in other words, it doesn't really make sense, because it's saying that people are willing to go over to the other side to be saved by this demon in the beginning and the end of the film, and that it's almost righteous that the demon exists as this kind of agent of justice in the neighborhood, when in reality it is a serial killing demon that the people have to welcome and that possesses the artist. And so that's pretty much Candyman 2021, the reboot. And I thought it was well done. I mean, in terms of the imagery in the film, and it is quite good in terms of like the way that the art world is portrayed, and the politics of the art world, and the way that the guy is supposed to gain inspiration within the film. So it is pretty well done in that sense. And of course, it's a Jordan Peele movie. And I like Jordan Peele. I like Get Out. I think Get Out is great. The latest one, Nope, was of course about the fake and gray Agenda 2050 thing, right? But and also, what was the other one? Us. Us was, I like one word titles, by the way. Us was about cloning, right? And sort of MK Ultra underground tunnel cloning systems. But he didn't direct this one; he produced it. And this one is more about, probably about how the neighborhood of Cabrini Green went from a place that people were afraid of to being a place where he was afraid of post gentrification, is what I'm thinking he probably would think. But it doesn't matter really what he thinks; it's what occurs in the medium itself. So that is. But I like Key and Peele. That has nothing to do with this really, but it's the same person. But it's an interesting movie, and visually it's pretty stunning. I could see that people would say that it's too didactic, right? Probably too teachy. But that's okay. So moving on, what should we do next? Why don't we let's talk about, should we talk about Wolfman? Oh, wait, just hold on before I move on. I think there's a big super chat that just came in right there. So let's take a look at that. Yo, let's see. Yo, shouts out to Mav out there who drops $100 super chat. Thank you so much. Says, can you review the movie? Can you review the movie The Menu, please? Can you review the movie The Menu, please? If you haven't already. If you have already, then my bad. Respect. I haven't reviewed The Menu, and I will. I will, because you just dropped a $100 super chat to sponsor a stream. So I will do The Menu, and that is a great example of someone dropping a super chat that is a good example for another theme for Spooktober, because it deals with cannibalism. So I will cover that and a couple of other movies. Maybe we'll cover Bones and All and a couple of other films, because that's certainly spooky. So thank you very much. And I saw earlier in David Patrick Harry and Allison's stream, shouts out to both of them, that Crystalline said, do a spoopy October themed stream, because then you'll get 100,000 subs. Damn, I only got 3. Where's mine? I'm doing spoopy October. No, I'm not really doing spoopy, but I'm doing Spooktober, right? That was good though. But yeah, so let's do, thank you so much, Mav. Really appreciate you out there. MAV. Thank you so much. So let's talk about the Wolfman. Okay. So this actually, the Wolfman, this is interesting because this is perfect for night creatures, right? Perfect for creatures of the night. Have my own applause, you guys. I got this when I was like 14 and it still works. Can you believe that? They don't make things like they used to. So let's talk about creatures of the night and the Wolfman. Well, did you know that, first of all, we've already covered the basis for this, because I did a stream on the skull beneath the skin. John Webster and the Duchess of Malfi, Renaissance Jacobean literature. That was not that long ago, but a long time ago in the life of this channel. And so please go back and check that out. I put the link in the video description. You can watch it afterwards. And that deals with lycanthropy. And also did you know that the Wolfman comes from a short story by this lady, her last name is Crow, and it's called The Werewolf, right? The Weir, W-E-I-R. The werewolf instead of the werewolf, right? And which is one of the first werewolf stories. And it specifically, I'll link it afterwards. I read and then reread the short story. And of course, it deals with some of the things that are in the Lon Chaney and the remake or reboot Wolfman, right? The Werewolf of Wisteria. Yeah, that guy was a real jerk, wasn't he? Huh? Uh, and namely that the beginning of the Wolfman is occult in nature. It deals with pentagrams, sigils, and amulets, and that the short story is like early 1800s. And I could go through some of it now, but instead, I think I'm going to go through. I brought some of Shakespeare and what he has to say about werewolves. The only mention really of Shakespeare and werewolves, right, which is Elizabethan Jacobean. I mean, John Webster goes into it much more in depth. So John Webster and his the Duchess of MALFI. But in As You Like It, let's see, what's this? This is Act 5, Scene 2. Rosaline says, is it Rosaline? Yeah, Rosaline says, they say, let's see. To her that is not here, nor doth not hear, Rosaline says, pray you, no more of this. 'Tis like the howling of Irish wolves against the moon. I will help you if I can. I would love you if I could. Tomorrow, meet me all together. I will marry you if I ever marry woman, and I'll be married tomorrow to Orlando. I will satisfy you if ever I satisfied man, and I shall be married tomorrow. I will content to Silvius. I will content you if what pleases you contest you, and you shall be married tomorrow and to Orlando as you love Rosaline. Meet. We're going to do a full As You Like It analysis later on, but she's talking. She mentions the howling of the Irish wolves, and this is a specific kind of folklore reference to werewolves from Shakespeare. And then I thought I would read what Shakespeare has to say about the wolf. This comes from a great book called Worlds of Shakespeare, Animals and Monsters by Alan Dent, which is a pretty difficult book to find. But it's a kind of glossary of everything Shakespeare says about animals in a folklore sense. So for the wolf, he says, this says, in a mountainous waste in Wales, where he is exiled with his brother and father, Arviragus in Cymbeline passes these random remarks, Act 3, Scene 3, line 35 in Cymbeline. And this is where the werewolf comes from, is Wales. What should we speak of when we are old as you? When we shall hear the rain and wind beat dark December? How in this our pinching cave shall we discourse the freezing hours away? We have seen nothing. We are beastly, subtle as the fox for prey, like warlike as the wolf for what we eat. Our valor is to chase what flies. Our cage we make a choir, as doth the prison bird, and sing our bondage freely. To which old Belisarius answers, how you speak. And we echo, passing well, and repeat the passage by heart to anyone who tries to argue that Cymbeline is an ill-written play as well as an ill-constructed one. But the immediate point in the line is the line about the wolf, whose wild veracity among the animals is as great as that of the vulture and the cormorant among the birds. Shakespeare notes this attribute in other places. If thou wert the wolf, thy greediness would afflict thee, and oft thou shouldst hazard thy life for thy dinners, as Timon of Athens to Epaminondas in Timon of Athens, Act 4. And an unnamed gentleman in King Lear, Act 3, Scene 1, line 4, which we've covered in King Lear, has a magnificent speech in answer to Kent's simple question, where's the king? And he says, do you remember this part from the analysis before? Contending with the fretful elements. Bide the wind blow the earth into the sea, or swell the cold waters above the main, that things might change or cease. Tears his white hair, which the impetuous blasts with eyeless rage catch in their fury, and make nothing of. Strives in his little world of man to outscorn the to and fro conflicting wind and rain this night, wherein the curb-drawn bear would couch, the lion and the belly-pinched wolf keep their fur dry. Unbonneted he runs, and bids what will take all. Ariel is told by Prospero, we've also covered The Tempest, of the sound he made when he was imprisoned within a cloven pine, which is interesting because imprisoned within a cloven pine is a reference to Peter Pan, right? And the boys being fitted with trees so that they can go down into the tunnels. Remember that? Thy groans did make wolves howl. The Constable of France says of the English soldiery before Agincourt that they will eat like wolves and fight like devils. We've covered Henry V twice. Other allusions to the wolf are plentiful, yet nowhere does Shakespeare so well catch the beast's utterly ruthless savagery as John Webster does in the Dirge, where various animals and birds are summoned to cover the friendless bodies of unburied men, and the 10 lines end with the couplet, "But keep the wolf far thence, that's foe to men, for with his nails he'll dig them up again." Now, that is a reference to the Duchess of Malfi, where, remember we covered this, one of the characters has lycanthropy and digs up the bones and the body of one of the other characters. And this is in the Duchess of Malfi. Let's see, Act 4, Scene 2, where Ferdinand says, "Oh, I'll tell thee, the wolf shall find her grave and scrape it up, not to devour the corpse, but to discover the horrid murther." Murther, right, which is an archaic form of murder. Yes? And remember the dead man's hand and pretending that Antonio and the children are dead and that he lives in darkness? Here's another part, Duchess of Malfi. "I would have you curse yourself now that your bounty which makes men truly noble, ere that should make me a villain. Oh, that to avoid ingratitude for the good deed you have done me, I must do all the ill man can invent. Thus the devil candies all sins o'er." Candy, he's the Candyman. "And what heaven terms wild, that names he complimental." Ferdinand says, "Be yourself, keep your old garb of melancholy. 'Twill express you envy those that stand above you your reach, yet strive not to come near 'em. This will gain access to private lodgings, where yourself may, like a politic dormouse," and then we go on. So, great book, great play, Duchess of Malfi. This is one of my favorite plays of all time because it sits outside of the canon of normal Elizabethan and Jacobean literature. And please go back and check out my full analysis of that. But what we have in The Wolfman, and this was, remember, Lon Chaney was the man of 1,000 faces, and then his son, Lon Chaney Jr., who is a gigantic man. I mean, he looks about 6'5", but I think he was about 6. I think it's said on his war card. You know, the movie was produced in 1941. That he was like 6'2", but he was a gigantic man. So Lon Chaney Jr. plays the Wolfman that we all know from the movies because Lon Chaney was in silent movies. So what happens in this is basically, and the same thing happens in the reboot of the Wolfman with the Wolfman with Benicio, is we begin with a character who returns to Wales to his manor house to see his father. And he's been recalled from abroad, namely from America. So Lon Chaney Jr. and Benicio both are Americans in their versions of the Wolfman. And he comes from abroad. And as he is going about one night, he is bitten by a wolf. But the wolf, and this is the same thing that happens in Jack Nicholson's Wolf, the wolf is not dead. They are hunting the wolf, and there are, let's say, Roma people that live around, right? And the Romani live in a nearby neighborhood, and so they start to get blamed for these murders, horrible, vicious murders. And what happens is that when Lon Chaney Jr. goes back to the place and he's talking to this girl that's going to be his love that is like lives in this antique shop with her dad, he's introduced to various amulets and a pentagram. And there's a cane that he buys that has the head of a wolf on it with a pentagram on it. And we learn that this is the kind of sigil of the night beast, and this is a wolf man. This is a man fully in the throes and depths of lycanthropy. So he actually turns into the Wolfman himself and goes about hunting at night, but when he wakes up the next morning, he is always unaware of where he's been. So it's interesting that the character, these characters have bits of DID, right? I mean, they're fully dissociating, but they are dissociating into night creatures and shapeshifters, or what we said in the Icelandic saga, Ehl's saga. Remember, they refer to these as shape changers. And the next morning, they're completely unaware. And so part of the narrative is about, part of the plot is about determining what is real and what's not, and who is the killer. And am I the Wolfman has to assume, like, am I the killer? He doesn't know until finally he has to be held at bay, right? At bay, the wolf's baying. He has to be held at bay in order to determine whether he is indeed the killer. So in the Wolfman version with Benicio, he goes outside and the Romani are being attacked by another Wolfman, and he saves the child until finally he's bitten and this happens. The Wolfman version 1941 is interesting because it's so clearly a soundstage, and that's fine. You have to suspend your disbelief, and this was made during the war, right? But Lon Chaney shows up. Lon Chaney Jr. shows up, and he's like, "Hey, what do you say there? They're causing quite a row downstairs." And he's a very big guy. He's very, Lon Chaney Jr. played Dracula and the Wolfman, and also Bela Lugosi is in this film too, which is great. Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula. I love Bela Lugosi. He's so interesting. He's so interesting looking. You remember the movie that Jamie and Jay covered with Bela Lugosi about the house, and it's set in the brutalist architectural house, and Lon Chaney looks exactly like Michael Aquino. I mean, it's very weird. I'm sure that he did that purposely, that he modeled his looks on Bela Lugosi. Obviously, it has to be obvious. But also, I like Plan 9 from Outer Space, and I like Ed Wood, how they portray Bela Lugosi in that. But so Lon Chaney Jr. has to figure out what's wrong, and it's interesting, the dichotomy here, because one of the tropes of 19th century literature is the split personality, right? Where the two characters completely split and are unknown to one another. We get this obviously in Jekyll and Hyde, which we've covered, right? And this seems to play out of the Victorian morals and mores following on from Romanticism. So Romanticism gives us these natural settings with nature as a cathedral, and the kind of playing into folklore and the haunts and local legends, right? We get that with Coleridge. Of course, the vampire itself, the first vampire story comes from one of the first, I guess the first, comes from Polidori. And Polidori wrote The Vampire, with the archaic spelling of the vampire, with Lord Riven, based on Lord Byron, at the same time, right, that Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, because they were in the house in Switzerland during the dark season, where they were all smoking opium and getting drunk, and they couldn't go outside, so they wrote ghost stories, and Polidori came up with the vampire, and Mary Shelley came based on Byron, and then Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein, that Shelley and Byron surely had a lot to do with the composition. But isn't that interesting that they came up with all that at the same time? But that is a result of late Romanticism, right? And Coleridge, yes, and Coleridge was a master of this, of course. I mean, the kind of structure and flow and hypnotic rhythm of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the content, the opiated, laudanum-induced content of Kubla Khan, plays a kind of it's a kind of groundswell for this. And so Victorianism is going to give birth to these works, because there's this weird, nexus point between the outer world and nature at the tail end of this, moving into heavy industrialism, industrial revolution, industrial society, combined with the faraway reaches of the colonies. it's like the colonies are far away, but the life of the empire is still at home. So there are these two lives. Like in Apocalypse Now, remember when the lady who also is a kind of psychopomp in Apocalypse Now in the Redux says, and there are two of you, one that loves and one that kills. And she says this through the veil to Willard. It's the same thing as a kind of, that's all kind of simulated by this entire genre, right? If that makes any sense. And so in the Wolfman, what happens is that let's talk about the Benicio one. This one could have been, I know it's not a review, but this one could have been great. And I watched a long interview with Benicio talking about his movies. I love Benicio del Toro. And he was saying that this could have been a much more successful movie if it hadn't have been R-rated, because he did the movie because he had watched The Wolfman when he was young. And so now that he had children, he thought it would be cool, like, that they're interested in these kind of black and white scary movies, as a kind of Halloween homage, right? But instead, midway through production, they decided to go with the darker elements of the film and to make it much more, gory and all this stuff. And he thought that that's what probably killed it. And it probably did. And I sympathize with that because, when I was young, I watched the black and white movies and I loved them. I loved the Wolfman movie. I loved the Mummy and the Creature from the Black Lagoon and all those movies. And so if they had focused on this without focusing on the gore and the horror, but in another way, it's kind of appropriate that they do that because they are horrific and there has to be some sort of outward sign that they're not just, kind of innocent folklore tales. Like that people are getting mauled by this demon lycanthrope, right? So what ends up happening is Benicio plays an actor who has returned from America. He's a stage actor. And his father, of course, is played by Anthony Hopkins. And Anthony Hopkins is interesting because you think at first that he is simply rehashing his character from Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he played Van Helsing. He plays such a great Van Helsing. He really does. I think that's probably his best role. But instead, when you watch the Wolfman, the 1941 version, you realize, no, he really is just playing the same guy as the 1941 character. So it's actually pretty accurate. And also, you are sketched out by the dad right away because the house is, of course, this dark, Byronic, Wuthering Heights house where there are like creatures everywhere, and they have Jeff Koons statues, bush statues of like a gorilla, and it's a zoological garden, a kind of zoological labyrinth in the garden with Jeff Koons statue, sculptures, garden sculptures. And we find out that the little boy who grows up to be Benicio is the way that he is because one night he went outside and he found his mother dead and his father kneeling over her, and we see a razor blade in her hand, which is very much Darkfall. And so obviously that fractures his mind and is going to make his mind retreat into some other character, and the nearest characters at hand are these zoological characters. So he becomes a beast. He becomes a beast character. Now, the difference is that the beast characters are the beast character is anthropomorphized into a completely separate he unifies into this, but it's like it's a completely separate identity. So it's different than like he's living in one place and there's another person doing this, or he's unaware. It's like he anthropomorphizes into the actual creature itself. And so this sort of reawakens his wolfish howling, and he becomes the Wolfman. And it's interesting that because of this is a romantic sentiment, that because he is seeking justice or love, that we sympathize with the character when he becomes this, right? Instead of the locals led by Hugo Weaving, Mr. Anderson, right? Hugo Weaving shows up and wants to get rid of him because he has these suspicions that he is the Wolfman. And when you're watching the movie, you're like, tell these guys to get out of here. You like it when Anthony Hopkins saves his son, but then you realize at the end of the movie, nope, they were right. They were totally right. They're not great either, but they were totally right. Speaking of Benicio, one thing I forgot to mention in the reptile stream was that it's funny how Benicio's physical quirks, like he's when he's doing the interview, he's holding his head like this. He's holding his hand on his jugular, almost like he's masking some sort of fang mark in his neck from like the proverbial reptile, right? But it's very weird how he's sitting like this when he's doing the interview. And then also, if you notice when he's writing with his pen like this throughout the movie. And I thought, when I watched it, I thought that is definitely no accident. Benicio del Toro does not write like that. That's the way this character writes. It's almost like his fingers are fangs, right? Or like he's the one pouncing on the reptile, or like that he's some sort of troglodyte who doesn't know how to write. Well, I just remember that today because I saw Gutfeld have his hand, he was holding his pen like this. So this is how Benicio held it. And then Gutfeld was like this. It's like, are the pens moving all the way over until someone's writing like this and then there's nothing to write with? Why are people writing like this now? Why aren't they just writing normally, right? What is this gripping at the base of the hand between weird fingers? What is that? Why are they doing that? Is this a new thing? Why are people doing the normal things in weird ways now? It's a complete, yes, it's devolving. It really bothers me. You know what really grinds my gears? When people don't hold their pen right. So, anyway, but that's the way Benicio does it in that movie. But so in the Wolfman, he ends up slashing a bunch of people in the woods in Wales or whatever. In Combray. Shouts out to my friend Richie out there. My friend Richard Corgan, who owns a theater company. He's great. He's active in theater. We trained together at Bristol. And Combray, Aberystwyth. He's from Aberystwyth. So he's slashing these people out in the woods in Wales, right? He's a weird wolf, a fate wolf. Weir is not fate. I know that's weird, W-Y-R-D. We've covered Macbeth, but weir as in the geographical structure. But anyway, so he gets caught and he gets chained up and taken down for psychological research. This is a great scene in the movie because the doctor who's doing the 19th century psychiatric, very crude probing, complete with the amphitheater like we see in From Hell, is the great stage actor Anthony Sher. And probably no one watching this knows who Anthony Sher. If you know who Anthony Sher is, or if you've ever seen him play with Anthony Sher, he died a little while back, but he was one of the great contemporary classical actors. And he's doing the probing in this. And what they do is they put him in a straitjacket. They put Benicio in a straitjacket, and they bottle ward. They bottle ward him in ice cold water, mixed in with this mechanical chain mechanism, and the sound of it obviously is so striking to the viewer that it's going to play into the mind of the programmed person who's the Wolfman. He's going to hear the grinding of the, hey, we just talked about grinding gears. He's going to hear the grinding of the gears. And we could say that this represents kind of a crude industrialism, right, put to use on human beings. So not only are they building buildings, but they are destroying the mind palace as he's lowered into the water. And we see that he is being tortured as he was when he was a kid. This has happened to him before. He was committed to an asylum after he witnessed the thing with his mom and his dad. Well, they wheel him out into the amphitheater, and they're going to do some experiments on him, probably a lobotomy, until one of the guys says, "Oi, look behind you. He's turning into a fucking wolf." No, literally, he's turning into a wolf. Turn around. Of course, none of them will turn around. until it's too late, and Benicio transforms into the actual werewolf because it's a full moon. He says, "Let me out, just kill me because it's a full moon." And they won't listen to him, and he breaks out and he slashes everybody in the amphitheater, and then he's running on rooftops. And in fact, there's a very Napoleonic scene where they shoot like a whiff of grape shot at him, but he runs right through them and he escapes. And they say, "Dear God, what have we got ourselves into?" Right? Well, his love in the movie is Emily Blunt. She plays the girl who owns who works in the antique store. This is great because it's Benicio and Emily Blunt, and they were in Sicario together. But she is the one to save him. And also, what's weird is that in the flashbacks of his mother, she is just like his mother, right? So it's like he's going out. It's like he's regressing into finding his mother lover figure, which is weird. But eventually, she she has to be the one to murk him with the Bilver Sullet, right? She has to get one of those, right? She has to find the Bilver Sullet, Bilver Sullet, and murk him so that he will turn back into human form and save him from the horrible experiments of the locals, and then he is freed. And it's, of course, notice that it's an exterior scene, so his soul is free to roam the romantic wilderness. So that's the Wolfman. That's the Wolfman 2000, like, what was it, 2010, 2011? And, one thing that, it's great because it's a reboot of the 1941 Lon Chaney Jr. film. And they're pretty faithful to that, even though they go hardcore with the gore, which is not cool. But it's a pretty fun movie, and I like anything Benicio is in. Anything Benicio is in, I like. So that is The Wolfman. All right, what's the next film? What should we do next? How about we discuss? Next we got to do Wolf with Jack Nicholson. Okay, so somebody can timestamp this later. So Wolf, starring Jack Nicholson, is a 1994 Mike Nichols film, which is interesting because this is he did this as a neo-noir film, and what we get is a much more urban film about sort of the corporation and the publication industry, right? So Jack Nicholson is an editor at a major publishing house in New York, and he's married. Cheers, everybody. Happy Spooktober out there. Happy Spooktober to all the ghouls and goblins and ghoulies out there. Make sure you smash that like. Share the stream. If you want to support me, you can hit the super chats, dono chat, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, get directly to me. Really appreciate you out there. So he is works for a major publishing house, and he's in New York. But in one scene, at the beginning of the film, he's driving to Vermont, and he's driving through the snow. He's, come on, snow. And you see he's in a Volvo, and he keeps like, is he in a Volvo? I think he's in a Volvo. Either that or a Mercedes. But whatever he's in, he's driving, and like he keeps wiping the inside of the windshield, and you're like, stop doing that. Just put the defroster on. But everybody's been in that situation, and he's driving very fast, and then he sees something in the middle of the road. Oops, right? Yeah, watch out because it's a beast in the middle of the road. And he thinks he has run over a wild beast, and he goes up, and it is a Rick Baker wolf. Rick Baker, of course, is the guy. He's like the special effects guy. He did Thriller and all this. And you can tell it's a Rick Baker wolf because this was done in 1994, and the wolf is animatronic. And he goes up to, I better see what's going on here, right? And he walks up to the wolf, and the wolf is... Let me turn my light on here, by the way. Hold on. There we go. Is that a little better? That's a little better. Now you can see. Now I can see too. I don't want to get too spook. It's too spooky in here. It's too spooky. It's too spooky, you guys. So the wolf is lying there, and of course, when he reaches out to touch it, he gets bitten right on the hand. Ow! It bit me in the hand. Ow! Damn wolf. And the wolf, he looks up, and this is kind of a cool scene in the movie. He looks up, and the wolf is, there are like a whole bunch of wolf eyes looking at him. Have you guys ever seen that movie, The Grey, with Liam Neeson? Right, there's been a crash. I'm going to fight this wolf. I'm going to break some bottles and put some fucking glass on my fucking knuckles. I'm going to fist fight a wolf. Right, well, the wolf gets up and is fine. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of eyes. Remember Liam Neeson in that says, it wasn't the alpha, it was the omega. It was the omega wolf. They sent her out. They sent her out to see how we were, right, to test the waters. Well, in this one, there's a whole bunch of wolf eyes looking at him in the darkness, right? And he's like, oh, dear, better get back to Wendy. So he gets in his car and he drives. And then he goes through his withdrawals, right? Because oftentimes the changeover into the monstrous beast creature is accompanied by kind of quasi-drug-induced withdrawals where they sweat and they shake and they, oh, right, they're howling. Not that happens, but I mean, he's howling like a wolf, right? And then he's got the taste of blood, so he goes out into Central Park and he starts hunting. There's a later scene where he goes out into Central Park and he's confronted by three fellas, and they're like, you know, give us all your money, right? And he's like, I've got $1,000 in my pocket. Which one do you want, fellas? What do you want first? Right? And they're like, shit, you know, we out of here. And then he takes their fingers, right? One of them gets away, but he the next day. So basically what happens is Jack Nicholson gets replaced in his editorial position by his protege, who is James Spader. James Spader in a early to mid 90s role. James Spader's great. But what's interesting is that this sort of functions, again, his changeover into the wolf is kind of a metaphor for his corporate mentality. And as he becomes more wolfish, he becomes more of a Wolf of Wall Street, one could say, right? Well, he says at the beginning, you know, my protege says that he's going to leave if I get canned. I guarantee he'll do it. And you're like, nope, he's not going to do it. He wants your job. And that's, of course, what happens. Christopher, what's the guy's name? You guys, what's the old guy's name he was in The Sound of Music. He's the great actor that I love. He was in 12 Monkeys. Oh my gosh. Now I got to look him up. Christopher, what's his name? Christopher Plummer. Christopher Plummer, thank you. Christopher Plummer is, of course, the dad of Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, you would think, see, what they did was, thank you, they subverted the Wolfman plot by instead of instead of it being an antique store, it's like Christopher Plummer is the guy that he works for, which is not the way that it is. He doesn't work for the father of the woman in the original Wolfman. Instead, I think that guy works for him. And then she has a lover who's a groundskeeper who doesn't trust him. But in this one, it's not that way. They live on an estate in New York, and this guy's mega, this guy is Faber and Faber or whatever it is, right? He's John Penguin from Penguin Publishing, right? And Michelle Pfeiffer takes an interest in him, and they end up knocking boots. And in the middle of the night, he takes off. He leaves. He jumps out the window, right, out the psychic window into his other personality, the wolf. And that's when he does this. Central Park shenanigans. But the next, later on, she's not going to talk to him because she's like, I'm not used to sleeping with men who jump out the window at night. And he's like, well, why not? I'm different from the rest of them. Right. So then they get back together, and her dad is Christopher Plummer, and they live on this estate. Well, then what ends up happening is, as Jack Nicholson becomes more wolfish, he gets his senses, right? And his senses allow him to hear farther than normal human beings, see the moon in all of its clarity, run faster, jump higher. And so he's embracing the base beast passions that allow him to supersede the normal human things that keep him in the fallen world. He's this demon creature, right? He then arranges a counter takeover where now he is going to take back his job, and he's going to write it into the new contract that James Spader's character will be out. He'll be pushed out. So there's a scene where they go into the bathroom and he says, I'm just marking my territory, right? And James Spader is kind of this beta character who can't really handle things, and he's like, I'm sorry, right? But of course I want to take your job, but I'm sorry, right? So then there's a media thing that happens because people are looking for the Central Park killer, right? They're looking for the werewolf of Wisteria, and they go to the jail and they ask for it's Jenkins. What's his name? The guy from Step Brothers. He's the cop, and they're asking for statements. And come on, why don't you come on down for a statement? Nope, not going to happen. But of course they say yes. And then James Spader shows up, and he's like, listen, I know who did this. It was Jack Nicholson. But when he shows up to the police station, he's talking to Michelle Pfeiffer, you can see right away, if they had just done this scene where we only get a glimpse of his flashing eyes instead of like his green wolf eyes the entire scene, they would have pulled it off. But instead they make a huge to-do about the Rick Baker eyes that he has. But there is a good part where he's talking to Michelle Pfeiffer, and he's like, so do you want to go out afterwards? And she's like, of course. And he's like, great. And he's like sniffing her like a wolf. She's like, okay, that's a pretty good scene. Anyway, she runs out of the place, and she goes back to her estate where she has locked Jack Nicholson up in the stables. And of course, the horses are going crazy. And you notice, by the way, that the stable doesn't have a top on it, and there's a beam. So you know that he can jump high. This guy can jump out a window. You know he's just going to jump over the stable at some point. And that's exactly what happens, because she gets back to her estate and she tells the guards, don't let anybody in, no matter who it is. And James Spader shows up, and he like says something very crude. And the guy's like, turn around. I said turn around. And of course, he runs over him in his Jeep Wrangler right through the wrought iron gates, which is interesting, and shows up at the place where then he's about to do terrible things to her in the hay. But Jack Nicholson goes crazy, takes off his amulet, which has been keeping him a wolf, embraces his wolf beast altar, jumps over the thing, and they kill and they get James Spader. And then we see Christopher Plummer come out. I always knew that you were the right man for my daughter, right? And the last scene we see is, this is interesting, is that Michelle Pfeiffer comes out and she says to the cops who show up, oh yeah, and by the way, next time you come here, maybe not have vodka tonics before you come do your interview, which is interesting because that's the reason drunks drink vodka, right? Because you can't smell it. But she's a wolf lady now, and she can smell it. And Jenkins is looking around. How could she smell that? No, surely she couldn't be a wolf too. So then the last scene in the movie, and this is pretty clever, I liked how they did this, is we see this weird piano music with this kind of vapor wavy montage, 90s montage of first person running through the jungle and the woods and the moon. And we know that now there are two wolves together in love, right? And Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer, Catwoman, she has become a werewoman, and they are united in love at the end of Wolf. So Wolf becomes a movie about the corporate world, the corporate takeover, where we, for what we assume, I mean, I guess Jack Nicholson's going to keep being a wolf after this, but he's going to work in the publishing industry, and he's going to have his werewoman as his werewife, right? So that's Wolf. Okay. On next to Let the Right One In. What do you guys think so far? What do you think? What would you rather be? Would you rather be a werewolf or a vampire? What do you want to be? What do you want to be? You want to be a ghoulie? Let's see. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Would you werewolf rather than vampire? Okay, there you go. Would you rather be a werewolf than a vampire? Okay, there's your poll. Please answer properly. Okay. Okay. We will collect tabulations at the end. We've never done a poll before. We like to have fun here on the Ghoulie channel, everybody. Toledo, make sure you answer that poll, okay? Would you rather be a werewolf or a mummy? Okay? Make sure you answer. Would you rather be a werewolf, yes or no? I mean, both are the living dead, I suppose. Right? They both have their vulnerabilities. I don't know. All I know is that the next film we're doing is called Let the Right One In. Okay? Now, this is an interesting film because, hold on. Yeah, this is an interesting film because it is Swedish and it is doesn't appear to be a vampire film. Yeah, it's interesting results. It doesn't appear to be a vampire film right off the bat if you don't know what you're getting into. Okay, so Let the Right One In is it's well done. It's disturbing. There's one scene. If anybody's seen this movie, I'm not recommending films, but I wouldn't like recommend this movie because there is one scene where I went no, and almost threw up. But so here's what it's about. Okay, so we're in cold Sweden, right, where we have the girl with the dragon tattoo territory, but it's set in the I suppose the early 80s. And we have this boy who looks like little Lord Buttercup. Okay, he's Little Lord Fauntleroy. Little Lord Sweet Cream haircut is living with his dad, I guess, in this shitty postmodern dead tech apartment. And he's out in the snow. The entire movie is there's the motif of coldness and snow, right? Because yes, they're in Sweden, but the cold and the frigid north is supposed to be an outer representation of their inner hearts. And he goes to school and he's bullied by this bunch of jerk kids or whatever. And he goes home, and then at night, one of the first things that we see is like one of the other neighbors walks out and he's like relieving himself outside, and he looks up and like one of the windows in the dead tech apartment is being covered by like cardboard or whatever. And then we learn that there's a guy inside and he is taking care of this little girl, and the little girl, of course, what we're going to learn is a vampire. Okay. And she is like 300 years old which they don't really mention that. I think they mention it somewhere in the film, and instead of her going out hunting every night, he goes out and does it for her. So we see the guy going out like Andre Ciccatelli or whatever into the white wilderness, and he gags a guy who's walking along in the woods. He hangs him upside down, and he has like this bucket, and he's about to he bleeds him into a bucket. Okay, which is, you're wondering, like, dude, is he just gonna kill this guy, or is he just doing a little bit to satiate her vampirical, grossness? What's happening? But then these girls are walking in the woods, and they're coming upon him, so he has to run away, and he leaves the guy hanging upside down, which is interesting because the victim is hanging upside down, like we normally associate Dracula hanging upside down. So therefore, are we assuming that the filmmakers are presenting this as a kind of subconscious foreshadowing that the bad people that we usually see, the villains in the vampire film, are actually going to be the good guys in this, and that the good guys are the bad guys? Because I think that's what he does in the film. He's acting like, remember in Only Lovers Left Alive, how they refer to people as zombies, even though they live this sort of zombie lifestyle. And zombies are tied in with vampires as well in terms of hoodoo. But that's sort of what we get, because nobody's presented in a sympathetic light except for the kind of vampire characters in this, right? So he leaves him, and then they find him. So now everybody in the town, right, in Gothenburg, where the Knife and Fever Ray are playing at the bar down the street, they know that there is a wild, white devil of the north who's like carousing through the woods, right? Well, he gets back home, and then this makes it so that the little girl is going to go through vampire withdrawals, and she's like, you're supposed to protect me and all this stuff. And he covers the windows, of course, so that the light won't get in, and she sleeps in the bathtub. And then eventually she meets the boy outside who is being bullied by these local kids. They're really horrible to him. And at one point, they confront him outside at night. They stand him up, and they start switching him. They have like, switches, and one of the boys switches him across the face, and this draws blood, right? Well, that's going to draw blood, drawing first blood. And so that is going to lead to another scene where he confronts his vampire friend who looks his age, and she's going to tell him, look, you have to stand up for yourself, which makes her sympathetic, right? Because she's trying to give him a life lesson. You got to stand up for yourself. And she says, then she'll help him. And she does. She does fulfill that into the bargain, but it's very dark. But she also she doesn't go for his blood, even though he's drawn blood and she's a vampire, right? So then later on, we see the guy, the caretaker, the kind of a Renfield out in the wilderness of this vampire girl, go out, and he kidnaps one of a group of like older boys who are outside, and he brings him down into the terror tunnels, into this like dark room or whatever, and ties him upside down again where he's going to bleed him. And he doesn't get away. And the kid wakes up, and he starts yelling for his friends. His friends are knocking on a kind of translucent window. So we see again the window. We have the inside dark terror tunnels of the life of the vampire, and we've got the outside frozen world of the people outside. So nobody is sort of sympathetic, right? And then the guy, like, he goes and he hides in this room, and he knows he's going to get caught, and he takes like hydrochloric acid or something, and he douses himself. He pours it on his face, and so his face melts. And the next scene is it's very reminiscent of the way that what Gary Oldman's character does to himself, but that's with a knife in the movie Hannibal, or a lot of these ghoulish characters in these horror films that we watch. They end up destroying their face purposefully because that's their face, and now their inner ghoul. It's like an outer symbol of their inner ghoul, right? Well, he's up in the hospital room. The little girl goes to the hospital, and she asks where he is. She says, basically, like, the woman at the desk sees this girl walk in, and it's like, this is a this is one of the lost children. This is a Stranger Things 11 walks into the hospital barefoot in the snow, and you're not going to do anything. You're not going to try and help her. She's like, oh, poor child. She kind of walks after her. But what's cool in this scene is that when the nurse comes outside and we have the frozen landscape in the hospital, you can see in the corner, you don't really notice it at first, but the vampire child girl is crawling up the side of the hospital. And it's pretty creepy. She crawls up the side, opens the window. Now she goes from the outer world into the inner world. She taps on the window because she has to be let in. The ghoul walks up to the window, tears out his trach tube, and to say, I can't say anything to let you in, right? But then he like presents himself and she kills him, right? She bites him and then he falls out the window to his death and he dies and then she flies away. So what we get there is that, like, we later get this in, she's talking to, I think, her friend, her little friend, and she says, he's like, where have you been? She's like, oh, I flew, right? So so of course, one thing about the vampire is that as the vampire consumes the psychic energy of youth, right, or of blood to stay eternally young, they fly because flying represents the fact that they are now not bound by the rules of creation because of their demonic energy, I suppose, right? So they can fly and they can do all these things that are sort of against nature because that's where they get their lifeblood. So anyway, she kind of takes up with the boy and shows him what she has to do. He keeps the house he keeps the apartment dark. There's a scene where the girl gets out again and now she's hunting. She's like full on hunting because she doesn't have her caretaker to get her blood. And did you guys like the poll? So she comes across this woman who is friends with the guy that we saw relieving himself outside. And by the way, that guy had made up his mind to tear limb from limb the person that killed his friend who was in another apartment, who he thinks is like the serial killer, but then is going to end up being the child because they said, oh, there was a child, somebody saw a child attack this man. Well, he comes across this and sees the vampire girl attacking the woman, but she doesn't finish all the way and kill her. So now that woman ends up going through vampire withdrawals, and now she's a vampire. And they arrest her. They take her into the hospital. She's going through weird withdrawals. And then she says, open the window. They open the window in the hospital, and she sets on fire. She's ablaze because light, right? The light burns the evil of darkness away. And she says she don't want to go on. So she is aflame in this bed. So now that guy goes hunting for the vampire girl and makes his way into the apartment where he finds her in her coffin. And her coffin is, of course, the bathtub covered by it's got a cover on it, and then she's like, there are blankets over that, and then the window is blotted out. But the boy comes in and saves her. He was hiding in the apartment, but he saves her, and just in time, she wakes up, she kills that guy, and now she's indebted to the boy. So then later on, the boy does stand up for himself, and he knocks one of the bullies in the ear with like a broom handle or something. And the broom handle was used to push away one of the dead bodies that the caretaker had one of the victims that he had found or that he had used and then thrown into this hole in an icy rivulet. And one of the boys has gone deaf. Well, that boy has an older brother, and there's a scene where he thinks he's okay because he stood up for himself, and he goes into this pool, and it's time for gym class, and he's in the pool, and then they blow up a car outside as a diversion, just like Anton Chigurh in There Will Be Blood. And the bully boys are inside. They ask him if he can hold his breath for 3 minutes, and they're going to drown him. Well, while he is holding his breath, he kind of goes into a murky other world, just like the man was thrown in the icy rivulet, so he was underwater, just like the water functions as a surface mirror. He's gone into the other side, into this other world. And while he's down there, they all get decapitated and the hands get cut off. The hand gets removed. Remember the Masonic hand in Duchess of Malfi gets removed. And we see that his vampire girl has saved him. But they have to split up, right? They can't keep on together forever. But what we found is that, again, it's a weird movie where the sympathetic portrait of the vampire overtakes the nastiness of the people in the outside world, and where it's supposed to be they found true love together, but really it's convenience and a kind of young love, and it's a kind of anti-fairy tale. Also, again, there's one flash of a scene that is, I don't recommend the movie. Okay. And I was pissed off that this was in the movie. And I can't say what it is, but it's fucking, oh my gosh. And so anyway, that's that movie. And so, on to the last movie. Sorry for the cussing here. The affiliates will not be happy with all the cussing. Yes, Anton in, did I say There Will Be Blood? I meant No Country for Old Men. I'm sorry. Yeah, No Country for Old Men. I'm saying like a million movie names and characters here, so forgive me if I mistook one for another. But we've done There Will Be Blood, and we've done No Country for Old Men. There Will Be Blood is not a Coen Brothers or Cormac McCarthy work, but both movies were filmed came out in 2007, and both were filmed in Marfa, Texas. So that's something that connects them, right? Okay. Please, again, don't forget to like and share. And before we get to this last film, and I will get to. Well, I'll say right now, thank you to that $8 from Jason on PayPal. Really appreciate you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you. Yo, shouts out to Evan for that $20. Really appreciate you. Drops $20 on PayPal. Thank you so much. Your support means a lot to me. Again, I just ordered the 9th configuration / Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane. So we're going to do that as part of Spooktober. And also, again, Mav M space AV sent me $100. So we're going to cover the menu and other related films as part of Spooktober. And don't forget tomorrow to be here for Stephen King's The Dark Half. Okay, this one's going to be a big one, purely literary stream. Even though that's not part of the canon of literature that we cover, right? It's still in the horror canon, so we can make an exception for that. And it's a good book. The only other Stephen King that I've done is, and I'm not like fan or anything. We covered those. They're revelatory for what we're doing, and we covered Firestarter as part of Stargate Monarch and Stranger Things, right? Shouts out to everybody out there. Thank you for coming by on this dark fall Thursday night. And I don't know about you guys. I mean, it got warm again here this week. All last week was dark and overcast. That's how I like it in the fall. My ideal weather is Belfast weather. I like dark, overcast, about 54 degrees Fahrenheit, slightly rainy. That's how I like it. So yeah, Darktober. That's right. Bourgeois Beatnik. Darktober. Spooktober, spooky season. Yes. So also I'm doing a Scream 3 analysis with our friend Maddie, the real Cooter Brown, Digital Minefield, on Saturday. Everybody please subscribe to his channel because we're doing Scream 3, which is going to be fun. I've done a lot of streams on his channel, a lot of, he lets me come over there and we talk about a lot of movies that we either wouldn't talk about ordinarily or we just talk. So shouts out to Maddie out there, my homeboy Maddie. And I sent him a copy of the AFI album, Very Proud of You, today, and said, listen to this. Just put it on loud, full blast in the office or wherever and just let it play. Because I've been listening to a lot of Misfits and AFI punk for Spooktober. But I also listen to a wide variety of music. You guys know that. So that'll be tomorrow night. All right. So One movie I forgot to mention, which I will right before we do this last movie, which is called Byzantium, is this movie that I watched called El Conde. And this one was a clever movie. It's kind of there's a little bit of a drudge to it, but it's called El Conde, and it's about Pinochet. In fact, this picture right here really sets the theme for this. Is called Pinochet: The Politics of Trotter by Hugh O'Shaughnessy. I read this back in 2003. But what's interesting, it's on Netflix. It's in Spanish, and what's interesting is it provides a nice little kind of false cognate pun there at the beginning, for the title, because El Conde, right, the Count. Pinochet saw himself as the Count, like Count Dracula, but also Condor, Operation Condor, right, for Chile. So basically the movie is about Pinochet as a vampire, and it's a kind of fantasy, fantastical history of Pinochet, his family in black and white as a vampire. And it is very dark, and it's very kind of Euro artistic. But I guess it's worth the watch. Probably not worth the full analysis. I mean, but it's worth checking it out, I suppose. One thing that's interesting is like there's a clever thing that they do instead of the Cambodia had the killing fields, and there's the guillotine, and there's every sort of revolutionary megalomaniacal movement has their method of obliteration, right? And the one for the Operation Condor and Chile, of course, was the Tierra del Fuego and the helicopters. So the people were disappeared because they would take them in helicopters and drop them out over the Tierra del Fuego, RIP. And what the movie does is it says they weren't dropped off at all. They were dropped at Pinochet's secret location where they were taken into the terror tunnels, and then they were used as feeding victims for El Conde, the vampire, which is an interesting take on a kind of phantasmagorical history. All right, so moving on to the last movie here. And this one is one of my favorites in terms of this genre, and it's called Byzantium. So the movie is about a girl played by Saoirse Ronan and her older sister, who's actually her mother. And they are living in what looks like Brighton in England, but I think it's actually supposed to be Hastings, and it was filmed in Hastings, which is interesting because, number one, it's the site of the 1066 invasion, right? The last invasion of England. And so we have a kind of invasion of dark forces, but it's also the site of Crowley's last years. So there's a kind of magical occult shadow that surrounds the setting for this movie. Even though that's not mentioned, it's kind of figuratively seen into it, right? Well, these two girls are living in current day, present day, and one of them is a stripper, and the other one is like a 16-year-old, and she sits at home and she writes kind of like prose poems, but it ends up being her story, her novel, or her memoir. And she takes the fragments of words and she shreds them on a balcony and throws them to the wind. And then this old man who lives in the apartment block, right? They're like at Divis Flats. It's like Divis Flats in Belfast, but instead this is somewhere in Hastings. They're in England, right, where there's chavs everywhere. And he takes the fragments and he says, I oftentimes find these fragments. I wonder who wrote them. And he sees that it's this girl. So they make friends and they talk. Well, what we learn basically is that the two girls are vampires and that they are living kind of on the lam all the time. And that they're not only on the lam from what would be the natural world hunting them as these demon creature vampires, but also from this order of vampires. So the story ends up taking place now, present day, but also in the Napoleonic era, which is a great setting for this because, the Enlightenment and then into the Napoleonic era certainly plays into the Polidori Byron-esque origins of magical creatures of the occult, subverting the normal method of life, right, and the natural order. So 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 the little girl, she's a little girl. She makes friends with this old man, and he takes her. They go back to the apartment, and he says, basically like he shows her a picture and says, "This was me a long time ago when I was young, and my wife died a long time ago. Can you help me?" And so then what happens is the girl says, "Yes, I can help you," and he presents his wrist, and she has her thumbnail, and she slices it into his vein, and drinks his blood, and ends his life. And so it's seen as in the movie as a kind of sympathetic thing, right? That he wants this end to come through her agency. He knows like sort of who she is, but her story is about her life and where she came from. And then in the meantime, we see her sister mother, who is a stripper, and who's trying to it's like she's living a vampire lifestyle, trying to make ends meet. And then she gets a man in black shows up, and he's hunting her. And then, eventually, we learn that they're hunting her because, well, I'll get to why they're hunting her, but she gets away, and then they set the apartment on fire, and then they have to move on to some other place. And this is apparently what they've had to do for a long time. Well, they get to this new place, and the little girl meets Caleb Landry Jones, who you just know is going to be a vampire because he looks like one in real life. And remember, he was in Get Out. He was in Antiviral, right? He's the kind of, he looks like a Brandon Cronenberg character. And we learned that he is going to this, I guess it's a drama school, because what they do is, it's some sort of school. But we learned that the girl was there years before, like 300 years ago. That's where she was sent to school. And so anyway, they're doing this sort of drama school activity, which is funny because what they show them doing is Tom Hollander is walking in this room, and they're all lying down on their backs, and he's like, "Evoke your emotion, write your story, tell your story." And there was this thing we had to do in drama school where in the improv, they called it impro. In the impro class that we did, we all had to lie down like it was a puzzle piece on our backs, and everybody's head had to be on somebody else's stomach. And then we weren't given any direction, and the guy just walked out of the room. And I remember my head was on this girl Heather's stomach, and she started laughing, and I started laughing, and then that caused whoever else's stomach, everybody ended up laughing. And then we learned that was the purpose, some sort of purpose for this organic avant-garde activity that we're doing, which is strange because classical drama school is not really avant-garde, but it was a weird sort of improv activity where just by having the back of your head on somebody else's stomach, you started laughing. So it was very weird, but I was like, what the fuck? What is this? And then, and then everybody started laughing. My friend Richie was like, "The fuck is this? What's this they're having us do at drama school?" So anyway, that's what they're doing, but he's telling them to write your story. So anyway, she starts writing her story, and she shares it with Caleb Landry Jones. Caleb Landry Jones says, "Yo, look, this is great. This is a great story, but this is not when are you going to tell me the truth about you?" And so he doesn't know that what seems like a fiction is actually her memoir. And her memoir tells about how she basically her mother was she was a poor woman. She was picking up cockles and mussels at the seashore until these two strapping Wellington-esque officers showed up. One of whom is Sam. What's the guy's name? I really like him, and he's born in 1980. What's his name? Sam. Gosh. Gemma Arterton is the lady. Sam Riley, who played what's his name in the Joy Division movie? Remember that? Sam Riley's cool. He's got a voice kind of like mine, and he's born in 1980. I like him. Also, he was in the movie. He was in a TV show called SSGB. The first scene of which had my friend Jonathan in it. So anyway, so Sam Riley and what's his face, Sick Boy from Trainspotting show up, and they're on horseback, and then Sam Riley goes up and he gives her a pearl. Okay, and she makes note of how the pearl thrives as everything around it dies. So this is going to be a metaphor for her as a vampire later, because she's going to stay young while everything around her dies. But in actuality, it's love that stays forever young. Love, right? God's love, human love, stays forever young, while passions sort of rot you on the outside. And this is going to play a part later on in the film. But anyway, Sick Boy says, you know, I've got to show you something. Come with me. And he puts her on horseback, and Sam Riley says, don't go with him. Well, he takes her to a house of ill repute and basically sells her to the G-Max character that owns the place. And then he, let's say, traumatizes her into the system. And she says, you didn't give me love or innocence. And he says, I gave you a job. I gave you your profession. Right? So now she's this, it's horrid, right? Well, so then what happens is that what happens? They get a box where they're shown that there's a place they can go to, because Sam Riley, that's what it is. Sam Riley finds that he has tuberculosis, and somebody gives him a box and says, basically, you can find the Fountain of Youth at this place, which ends up being Skellig Michael, right? Faraway Jedi Irish mountainous hermitage. And so they go in search of it. They have to sail out there, kind of like in the island, right? Alex Garland's island, where they're going to find eternal youth at this place. And he climbs up this mountain like he is on a, capital M mission. And they end up at the honeycomb shaped hermitage of an abandoned hermit, living on the mountain, on the island. And he gives an empty jug of water to Sick Boy, says, go collect water. So he's distracted, and then he goes inside of the hermit's cell, and when he walks inside, there's a darkness, and there's a dark chimney with bats, and there's the kind of wet marble floor of an occult ceremony, but he sees himself standing there. And when he gets there, he says, basically, like, he meets himself. And he meets himself as a demonic entity that kills him by stabbing him in the jugular and drinking his blood. So he dies to the world, but now he's going to be living dead. And when he does that, the blood emerges on the outside of the top of the mountain and flows down the mountain. So it's like all of the blood of himself is now outside of himself flowing. So he's no longer alive anymore. It's a really wild scene. And it's really wild because I don't remember any other vampire movie doing this, where instead of being bitten by a vampire and being made into the living dead, you meet yourself as a specter. So that what's going to happen when Jim Arterton gets there is she meets herself. And she says, I knew you'd find it. And she says, what? And her altar says, the end of time. So it is the end of time, because there's no more time for her, because now she's living in endless time, right? Kind of like Macbeth says, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, right? Macbeth shall sleep no more. She'll never sleep again. This occurs in a lot of psychopathic and serial killer and occult books. It occurs in the Dark Half because Thad Beaumont's character says he never wants to sleep again after he figures out that his altar is George Stark. Like the nightmares have been absorbed into the daytime, right? Into your ever living life. But it's not ever living, it's living death. Yes. So anyway, so Sam Riley emerges, and then later on, we learned that Sick Boy is this character, Lord Riven. And Lord Riven is interesting because Sick Boy played him in, Johnny Lee Miller played him in, he played Byron in a different version of the movie Byron. And Lord Riven by Polidori is based on Byron because he's a Byronic hero, and that's like the first vampire. So he shows up later and he wants access to this, right? So he wants to find the box, and he ends up. So what happens is Gemma Arterton gives birth to Saoirse Ronan, and they say that you can't have children in this. You can't have children in this house of ill repute. But the child lives, and she has this great line about you're never in danger so much as the day you're born, right? Because her own mother tried to keel haul her, right? But she makes it, and then later on, when she's older, Lord Riven shows up and violates her, so that she will live as a living death with the terminal disease of syphilis, because now he's syphilitic. And because of that, Gemma Arterton kills him. And the problem is that there's a vampire order, a brotherhood, where Sam Riley is in this brotherhood with these older guys, and they make sure that the vampires, like, there's this order, but it can't be broken by having a woman in the order. Well, once they find out that Gemma Arterton has made her way to this place, they say, okay, well, she'll be an outcast. She's not in the order, but we're not going to kill her because of, extenuating circumstances. But then when Gemma Arterton takes her daughter to Skellig Michael to become a vampire, she breaks the code because she wants her to live forever, because otherwise she'll be condemned to this syphilitic death. So now Saoirse Ronan is a vampire. So now they're on the run from the vampire brotherhood. Well, eventually they make their way in the real world, in the present day. They make their way to a hotel, which is called Hotel Byzantium. So it's supposed to be a physical symbol of the old world and old order and code and religion, but subverted by their vampirical activities. And then eventually the Code Brotherhood will catch up to them, and there's this old dude, and he brings out this is a sword of Damascus. It is from the Crusades, from Byzantium. And he gives Sam Riley the ritual sword to behead Gemma Arterton because she has broken the code. But instead, Sam Riley, he's in love, and he gave her the pearl, so he beheads the head of the order, and now they're all going to live as outcasts. And what's interesting is that the same thing with the thumbnail, literally thumbnail in the jugular occurs. That's the way Lestat kills in, not the entire time, but in Interview with the Vampire. And Interview with the Vampire is also directed by Neil Jordan, right? The poll was to see what you would rather be. Would you rather be a werewolf or a vampire? Yes, for werewolf. Would you rather be a werewolf? Oh! Or would you rather be a vampire? I have crossed oceans of time to find you. Stragoi. What music they make, the children of the night. Right? So, do you guys remember a few years ago when they arrested a werewolf punk with a cape on a motorcycle in, like, Buenos Aires? Let me see if I can find this, because it is pretty funny. Werewolf motorcycle Buenos Aires. I think it was Buenos Aires. I'm never gonna find this. This kid was arrested. He was, like, dressed a guy dressed as werewolf on motorcycle. No, I'm never going to find it. Damn it. It was, oh, wait, no, here it is. Yeah. Look at it. Hold on. I'll link this for you. This is really good. All right, hold on a second. I'll pull it up here for you. I don't know if I'll be able to link this picture. Okay. Let me see if I can pull this up. Give me 1 second. This might be worth it. You guys might appreciate this. Okay, no, I can't do that. Let me see. Let me see if I can pull this up. Hold on. Yes. Okay, here it is. All right. Check this out. This is so good. Wait, what? Yeah, okay, hold on. Yes, okay. Man arrested for roaming streets dressed as a werewolf to scare people on New Year's Eve. Oh, it was Pakistan. The man was allegedly making roaring noises to scare people passing by. Look at the picture. Please, I hope this goes. Yes, look at this. You guys remember this? This is, 2021. Police in Pakistan have detained a man who was riding through the city streets dressed as a werewolf to scare people on New Year's Eve. They're investigating his motives. Look at the picture. Yeah. It's probably. Do you guys think that's funny? It's okay. That's just. All right, there's the article if you're interested. Yeah, that's his mutt shot. Okay. So, yeah, that's his mutt shot. So anyway, what happens? What happens at the end? Look how small the dude is. He's got a cape. Is he wearing a cape? So okay, so that's Byzantium. They save the girl. They live on, and again, we get this interesting thing that occurs in Wolf, right? Which is this weird fusion of writing, right? Writing one's own story and living forever, right? Because the girl, Saoirse Ronan, wants to live forever, but she knows she's condemned. And it's also interesting because she didn't really have a choice in this, and so. Again, one thing that often happens in the vampire movie is that the vampires subvert our natural expectation and our order of things. Yes, and that is that we find sympathy with the creatures of the night because they did it out of love, of course, right? The girl saves her daughter to live forever in death, right? Which is also interesting because they subvert Byzantium. Yes, the sword of justice, which is wielded by the vampires. See, I would expect that the vampire club in the movie would be vampire hunters instead of vampires living by this code. But instead, they even say that in the film, that we are the arm of justice. So the arm of justice is supposed to be some sort of Depop thing, right? Run by the vampire club, which is interesting because if they are involved in Depop, then the expectation goes that one day there would be nobody and they would roam the earth as specters, dead because there would be no more victims. Yes. So that is Byzantium. So again, tonight we have done the Wolf. Wolf, Jack Nicholson. We did the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr., 1941. We did the Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. We did Let the Right One In, which again is even the title is a vampire reference. Yes. We did Byzantium and we did Candyman. And we also talked about El Conde. But I would check out, if any of those to check out, I would check out Byzantium because it is, here's the image of when they arrive at the, island. There's Sam Riley as a kind of Napoleonic, he's supposed to be a dark, brooding, Byronic character there. That's obviously in the library at Trinity College, where the Book of Kells is. If you guys ever go there, if you ever get to go to Dublin, you should go to Trinity College Library and look at the Book of Kells. And here is John Polidori on the right, who looks like a vampire, and there's Lord Byron on the left. And that's one reason it has this sort of Byzantine or Byzantium theme to the movie, because of course Lord Byron died in it's not Byzantine, but he died in Greece fighting the Turks for Greek independence. They say that Lord Byron's heart is buried in Greece and his body is buried, I think, at Poets Corner in Westminster Abbey. We've done a whole Byron stream, of course. Let me find the Skellig Michael. It's a really good image. That's not it. That's me as a vampire, as like a 4-year-old. That's pretty good, right? Hey, can you tell how in character I was? You could tell I'm an actor because I was in character. I think that's great. I remember that very vividly. I'm wearing a cape and everything. See, my mom painted a Bela Lugosi widow's peak on me right there, and I had fake blood. Then I put on the vampire teeth, and I remember them. They didn't really fit right. They were too big. But anyway, there's the Skellig Michael with the blood flowing down when Sam Riley first gets there, and it's an interesting scene. Neil Jordan is a good filmmaker. And just to finish it off, here is an image of Kiss of Death by Tim Noble and Sue Webster. And this plays into our kind of Nitecreatures theme tonight, because those, if you can see, are two balls of vermin on top. There's jackdaws, crows, rats on a pike, on a Macbeth-style pike, and the shadows form a kind of Medusa and Odin-esque image. I saw this at the Guggenheim in 2005, and it stuck with me all the time. It's from Tim Noble and Sue Webster, who are two of the YBA's, Young British Artists, which are usually you associate that name with Damien Hirst, because Damien Hirst is the one who did the bisected shark on display, and then the cow. He does bisected animals, which is they sell for $100 million. Come on, right? But that is a kind of occult ceremonial witchcraft as modern art that we discussed in our Velvet Buzzsaw and Dorian Gray stream. We talked about modern art and surrealism. Surrealism has its roots specifically in the occult. You can look at the Surrealistic Manifesto, Andre Breton. And actually, I wrote this poem was in the book that I wrote. And it was about that exhibit. It's time for a dark fall poetry hour. So this is called Kiss of Death, because the sculpture itself is called Kiss of Death. We faced each other in shadow by a white wall with light beams profiled and ambient warmth. And we should have been in love, but The shadow hit our heads, hided with a ball of vermin, your nose nostril by a rat's dig, Medusa hair, mollusk fur, my neck nailed through with a jackdaw, lips dried out of rodent rinds. We faced each other while a crow crowned me and plucked out my eyes while you watched like wisdom, whispering to Odin, dismythic, though really we had turned from lovers in life to Hades hid, hell dwellers, or just shades of our former selves, recycled and piked like traitors, pick-boned for pillage of this glimpse of this life, this death. So, that is my kind of Eliot / Yeatsian poem about Kiss of Death at Guggenheim 2005. And I went back today and I was looking for this poem, and I found a whole book of poems that I wrote called Golden. It's called Golden Triangle. And then I thought I had only written 2 or 3 chapters of this novel that I started that I haven't worked on since 2012, and I totally put it aside and put it out of mind. But I found it, and I'd written like about 12 chapters of this thing, and I should have published it at the time because it's called All the President's Children, and it's totally in line with the thing going on with Bunner Hyden right now. It's about that. It's about those kinds of characters. It's called All the President's Children. So I have about 12 chapters of that. So I think I got to get back to working on that. If you want to help me publish my novel, if you want to help me support me while I do this so that I can work on writing, then you can support me anytime with a super chat here or a dono chat, or you can hit the PayPal, Cash App, Venmo links in the channel description, in the video description. Let's look one more time and see if we got anything here. Let me look at dono chat. I don't think there's anything in dono chat. First person Q drops $5. Thank you, first person Q. No comment. $5 on dono chat. Really appreciate you. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. Your hard-earned bucks. Definitely. Thank you so much. Shouts out to Mav for that $100 again to want me to do the menu. And let me see if we got any others one more time. Yo, shouts out also to K. Owen, who dropped $10. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, K. Owen, who's in all the chats. And, of course, thank you to Sammy for that $50. And, yes, so, again, you can catch me. Oh, it's almost 10 o'clock. I better get going because I will be dropping into Boiler Room. Let me give you a link for that, you guys. I don't know if I can even get to it right now. Can somebody, Jason or somebody, Jason, who does such a wonderful job and supports me very much. Thank you to Jason and Jethro and everybody out there. Can somebody drop a link to Rockfin Boiler Room? If you just go to Rockfin Boiler Room, go to the channel and drop a link in the channel. In the chat right here, because I'll be getting on there right after we get off of here. Also, tomorrow night, if you go to Digital Minefield, Real Cooter Brown, Digital Minefield, that is our friend Maddie. And I'll be doing a stream with him. Not tomorrow night. That's Saturday night. I'll be doing a stream with him on Scream 3. And then come back tomorrow night, because tomorrow night, I've already got it up. I will be doing a stream on The Dark Half by Stephen King. Please go back and watch the old streams. Give those a chance if you haven't seen those, especially the Dracula stream. Go and watch Donnie Darko on Made by Jim Bob's channel. You can watch Nightcrawler, Dark Fall, Spooky Season, Episode 1, right, which was the final girl. This is Episode 2. This is Night Creatures. And then 3, we're going to have, of course, The Dark Half tomorrow night. And then we'll also be doing things on cannibalism and things like that coming up. So that's about it, you guys. Please join me over at Boiler Room Rockfin right after this. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for being here. And again, out of all these movies, I would recommend Byzantium probably the most. Thank you. Thank you to Jethro. Thank you to Jethro out there who's got the links. Jethro. Everybody give Jethro a big old hand. Give him a clap because he's a king here. So thank you to everybody. Really appreciate you. And I will see you guys soon. And thank you so much. Right? Was it worth it? Only if you're strong enough, right? All right, y'all. I'm going to leave you with Rooks G and cut off his old album, Cyberliminal, because Rooks G is actually dropping a new song either tonight or tomorrow. Check out Rooks G. Here is Underground Pool Facility from Cyberliminal. This is Rooks G, and I'll see you guys soon. Love y'all. Peace. Be good out there, ghoulies. Peace. Keep on LIVIN.